Hello and welcome to tonight's episode of Double Down on the Irish Inquiry. I'm your host, John Caulfield, and tonight I'm joined by Aaron Kelly. Aaron is a specialist in 5G/EMF technologies. This is something, Aaron, which I believe within the Shout movement, it's obviously very much to the forefront of people's consciousness. People are trying to become more educated and aware as to the hazardous health ramifications, I suppose, which are not being spoken about in mainstream society, and there's a complete lack of awareness. So with that in mind, maybe just to begin the conversation, you might let the audience know what your background is, what your credentials is, and what specifically is your niche area of expertise in this area.
Well, thanks very much, John. Thanks for inviting me on, both yourself and Irish Inquiry. I guess, yeah, you don't start out doing this. So basically, I qualified as an electronic engineer back in the kind of mid-90s, but that was dot-com boom era. So I ended up going into the software side of things. Basically started working in financial institutes, banks, insurance companies, this sort of thing. Progressed into utilities providers, like electrical utilities, before eventually ending up in national and international telecoms. And it was in when I was working in international telecoms that I began to get kind of, if you like, suspicious that something wasn't quite right, something was going on here. Now, initially, I wasn't actually concerned about the health effects of this at all. It was actually, I'll just tell a very quick story. We were sitting in a room one day with a few hundred people, and basically we were painted this wonderful vision of the future where this per man phones up to order a pizza on the phone, excuse me, and basically through the wonderful world of integrated technology, integrated databases, that his health records get accessed. And basically it turns out he's got high cholesterol and he's a bit overweight, so he ends up getting sent a salad instead of a pizza. To which I was pretty horrified, really. I was thinking, well, who asked for this? This seems incredibly invasive. But I seem to be quite alone in my concerns about this. Everybody else seemed to think this was wonderful. So I began to voice my concerns then to some other colleagues at that time. And this was then that they basically said to me, look, forget about the privacy concerns here. What about the detrimental health effects? At which point I went, like, what detrimental health effects? What are you talking about? And I've been working in the industry for about 15 years at that point and had absolutely no idea about any of this. So basically, so I went off on my own kind of journey of research, if you like. And as like with many things, as I'm sure you've discovered yourself, John, you don't need to dig deep. You just need to scratch the surface. And suddenly I was finding, hundreds of pieces of research, of scientific studies showing that wireless technology was detrimental to human health. I'm quite kind of shocked that I didn't know this. Basically, again, cutting a long story short, so I kind of went away for a while. I was doing my own research, and when I came back, as you do, I threw my CV into the recruiter, and the first job offered to me was involving 5G. And this was my kind of fork in the road Damascus moment, as it were. Do I take the easy money, continue doing what I'm doing, or do I kind of go to hard road? So I stuck with software for a little while. No, I didn't take that job, obviously. And eventually, I think it was late 2018, the opportunity arose where basically it was between jobs, and it was right, okay, do I just keep going in the software, or knowing what I know now, do I actually try and do something about this? So I switched tack. I went over to England and trained up as electromagnetic field assessor, if you like. Got qualified to do electromagnetic field assessment.
What does that actually mean, Aaron?
So basically, you're going into, just like any other kind of safety assessment, you're going in and you're basically taking measurements of electromagnetic fields and making sure that they are compliant with the law and directives, which even that, there's not a lot of people. 2016, the EU brought in legislation that says that every workplace has to carry out an electromagnetic field assessment. Not that many companies kind of know this or do this. But so again, with that legislation coming in 2016, I thought there was a kind of a niche market beginning to open up there. But I very quickly realized that in the commercial end of things, exactly that. It was like a kind of a box ticking exercise. It wasn't really doing what I was trying to do, which was raise public awareness about this, because it simply wasn't there. So I ended up in 2019 deciding to switch tack again and deal with the domestic market. So I started EMF home surveys. And basically since 2019, I've been catering for the domestic market side of things. It was also around 2019 when, again, I was in touch with a lot of people that had done the research in this, ex-industry and what have you, that were aware of this. And we were beginning to have these conversations of, look, are we actually going to try and do something here about this? So eventually we ended up kind of meeting up in a conference room in a hotel. And from that, Ireland for Safe Technology was born, which was an attempt at a kind of a national, an effort towards pushback, towards actually trying to get something done about this technology. I've been working with them ever since. So that's kind of loosely how I ended up where I am here now today, doing what I'm doing.
And now you're known as the 5G guy, Aaron. No, look, it's a very important area, and like as we're going to explore, it's not just 5G. Like it goes to 2G, 3G, 4G. So with that in mind, maybe in order to kind of frame the discussion for the layperson viewer, Aaron, maybe there might be a few technical terms that you might be able to just give a kind of an understanding, so people can actually become aware of what the jargon actually means. So just a couple of things I found just from my research. So electromagnetic frequency and radio frequency, millimeter and submillimeter waves, and electromagnetic radiation. What does all that mean?
Yes. Yeah. No. And you mean that's a hell of a start of a 10 question, because it really is. This is quite a complex field with an awful lot of jargon. And the jargon, I often say, the easiest job in the world would be to work for the telecoms industry, convincing people that this is safe, because it's very easy with so much jargon to confuse people, to people, members of the public that have very, very little knowledge in this. And all you really need is a tiny little bit more knowledge on this, and you can confuse, you can baffle people. We say baffle them with science by all these technical terms. And the reality is that an awful lot of these terms can be simplified. I mean, essentially, it's an oversimplification, of course, and this is the problem with this, but essentially, we're talking about the same thing. These are all the same thing. So kind of break it down a little bit there, what you're talking about. Essentially, of course, what we're talking about here is wireless technology. We're talking about, mobile phones, 2G to 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell towers, all this side of things. And all these, basically, what wireless technology is doing, of course, it is transmitting data wirelessly. This is kind of the whole point of wireless technology. Your mobile phone, it's carrying your voice or internet or what have you. Cell towers are doing the same thing. Wi-Fi is doing the same. It's just data transmission. And how that's achieved is by transmitting this data, encoding this data into electromagnetic waves, into waves, which are transmitted from devices at certain frequencies. Okay. Now, the electromagnetic field. So any device that's transmitting data wirelessly, the field, if you like, the electromagnetic field is the kind of the space that it's kind of transmitting that data in. And when we say transmitting this data in, what we're talking about is, there's the electromagnetic waves. It's energy, and the energy in that is radiation. So when we say electromagnetic fields, what we're really talking about is electromagnetic energy or electromagnetic radiation. They're all the same they're all the same thing. Now, all the kind of technology we're talking about tonight operates in, I don't know, you probably remember back in your secondary school days, maybe in a physics class once, you saw this thing called the electromagnetic spectrum, which was basically this chart that showed a kind of wave getting tighter and tighter as it went up the scales. And basically this is kind of the it's a spectrum of frequencies. And all the technology we're talking about here operates within a specific portion of that electromagnetic spectrum, a portion of the of the overall frequencies. And to bring into the RF, the portion that it's operating in is the radio frequencies. Okay, and again, radio frequencies or radio waves or microwaves, again, essentially what we're talking about here, this is all the same thing. Do you know? We're talking about wireless technology that employs electromagnetic energy, electromagnetic radiation to transmit data. That's kind of really what it boils down to. But it's very easy to confuse people with this because, as I say, what we're talking about here, electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic energy, electromagnetic waves, electromagnetic radiation, radio frequencies, microwave radiation, this is all the same thing. It's radiation that is being emitted from modern wireless technology. And all these and there's a lot of them, as you say. There's EMF, there's electromagnetic fields, there's electromagnetic frequencies, there's electromagnetic EMR, electromagnetic radiation, RFR, radio frequency radiation. And I think one of the most important things, because when you're trying to research this for yourself, when these jargon words are interspersed and used, even within one sentence, you can end up completely confused by this.
It's designed to bamboozle, it seems, Aaron.
Well, yes, I mean, it would appear that way, and certainly whenever you get into looking at the kind of official documentation. So, for example, the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Guidelines for the General Public. I mean, that's it. Yeah, it is. It's a document that can't have been created without confusing the subject being kind of a portion of the point of the whole thing. Like, because even for myself, so whenever in the early days when I went out and got my first EMF meter and I switched it on all excited and numbers appeared on the screen, and then you kind of, oh, right, now what? So I thought, well, what do these numbers mean? Are these safe numbers? So I go to the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection to check the numbers, and it's just this massive document. And I go, where are the numbers? So it's extremely, it can be an extremely complicated topic. And it's a little bit different in that, like if you're studying maths, you start off with the easy sums, and then things get more complicated as you go along. In this topic, it's a little the opposite is kind of true. This just what we're talking about, this particular bit of it, this trying to make sense of this initial, what is this? What are we really talking about here? Once you get your head around that, everything actually becomes easier as you go on because you've got a context to put it in. And when you understand that when somebody's talking about microwave radiation or radio frequency radiation or electromagnetic radiation, and the realization that they're talking about the same thing, suddenly things begin to get an awful lot easier, And that's essentially, so the jargon part of this is, I mean, this question you've asked here is probably going to be the most difficult one to answer, the one that's going to confuse people the most. But that is it. I mean, there's a lot of flow. So when you talk, what's the difference between EMF and RF, blah, and the reality is, although they do have obviously distinct differences, for the sake of trying to get your head around this, it's all the same thing. It's radiation that's coming from wireless technology, which is problematic to us, to our health, because this is artificial. It's artificial, man-made radiation that doesn't exist. Of course, there's natural electromagnetism is one of the fundamental forces of nature, so it exists in nature. But this stuff that's coming from the new technology, wireless technology that we're using, is artificial, man-made, and we weren't either evolved with it or designed for it, whatever take your belief system has on that. But we weren't meant for this, for being subjected to this. And that's kind of really the long version of the answer to that. But it's such an important part of the puzzle here, is that when you start to do research on this yourself, you're presented with all these different kind of jargon terminologies, and it's very easy to go, my head can't handle this. This is too complicated. But if you can understand that really we're all talking about the same thing, radiation from wireless technology.
And I suppose with that in mind, Aaron, like that's kind of the premise of the show, because there is, so much conjecture and stuff around this area that there's not really a clear approach. So it's for, someone like yourself that they can just provide a you know, I suppose I've spoken to you about this before. You often just try to simplify down these complex terminologies for the layperson to understand, so people are actually aware of, you know, the actual consequences of this technology. With regard, and obviously, you know, we'll come to 5G in a minute because that's obviously the most, I suppose, salient one of the day, considering it's, you know, it's so new, it's so modern, so much kind of discourse around it. But with regard to 2G, 3G, and 4G technologies, Aaron, like, have they, and I know you speak from a very scientific basis on this, have they been like categorically and scientifically proven to be hazardous to public health?
Well, sorry, I realised I didn't answer your question fully last time. You mentioned millimeter waves and sub-millimeter waves, and the same answer applies. Millimeter waves is just the wavelength of a frequency. It's just a different way of measuring the frequency. So a millimeter wave is simply basically a 30 gigahertz radio wave. So we're back to the radio frequency again, you know. So it's the same thing. Sub-millimeter waves are higher frequency again, you know. So again, just sorry to complete that. But to answer your question, so has 2G, 3G, 4G, did you mention 5G in there as well? Because there's a slight distinct difference on this. If
you feel it ought to be incorporated, by all means, you know, if there is a slight difference, you know, I was going to go to 5G next and just kind of ask as to why that is such a great concern.
And what it makes sense that you're doing it. Okay, so to answer the question categorically, there is no ambiguity here whatsoever. 100%. It has been scientifically proven that radiation from 2G, 3G, 4G devices is absolutely detrimental to human health. There's almost a problem in this area, which is going to sound ridiculous, that there's so much evidence and data and research around this that it makes actually exploring it very, very difficult because there's so much out there, and you start to research this for yourself. There's just myriads of data and papers and all the rest of it. But so we're literally, I mean, we're not talking, as I say, it would almost be easier if there was 50 pieces of research or, you know, peer-reviewed papers that demonstrated the harm, because that would be kind of something manageable. But the reality is there is, you know, I mean, somewhere it's certainly in excess of 10,000 kind of studies. And it kind of, if you go back into throughout the, you know, the 20th century, you know, as far back as the 50s and 60s and all the rest of it, there's, you know, there could be around 30,000. So there's an immense amount of data out there. And it's very difficult for you to begin to research this for yourself because of that. Now, if you want to take like sort of a keep, I understand kind of time is obviously going to be a huge factor against us here, and we're trying to simplify and summarize here. So a kind of a headline, if you like, recent piece of research was done by the US National Toxicology Program in America in 2018. You know, so we're talking, this is a massive piece of research, you know, involving millions of dollars. And their conclusion, if I can remember this stuff, I had found clear evidence of tumors resulting from exposure to 2 and 3G mobile phone radiation. Simple as that. Now that, in and of itself, that one piece of research should be enough to, at the very least, have us invoke what's called the precautionary principle. Hold on, something's not right here. You know, this is a massive. This is a government body. This isn't, you know, some kind of fringe kind of site. And of course, it can go on from there. So it's, you know, to do your own research on this, to discover the research can be difficult, and you almost need like kind of a kind of strategy, because if you just kind of blindly go in and start, you know, oh, this paper or this paper, it's overwhelming, and you simply wouldn't have the time even in a lifetime to go through it all. So there's a couple of different tactics or kind of suggestions I would make for beginning to do it. I think start off at the you know, the US National Toxicology Program kind of study in 2018, and you know, let's just go to the conclusion side of things on that. But I think it might be kind of useful if you looked at the response, perhaps, of other people, other bodies, other institutions and that, who have done the research and what their conclusions are. So, for example, I mean, again, and we're not talking any French here. So, for example, the World Health Organization in 2011, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe created Article 1815, I believe, which basically says, okay, well, first of all, in 2011, this was the first time the World Health Organization recognized radio frequency radiation from mobile devices, etc., as possibly carcinogenic, as possible, cancer causing. And from that, Article 1815, Resolution 1815 was created, which basically said, okay, this is in Europe. At this, we need to now embark on a public awareness campaign. We need to be informing people of the dangers of this. We need to take Wi-Fi out of schools. We need to be using wired solutions. All these things, which are, you never hear about this. A lot of people, I'm sure, listening to this right now is the first they ever heard of it. Another good example is in 2019. A professor in University College Cork. In 2019, the Irish Times did an article basically talking about 5G, and it was basically poo-pooing the whole notion that it's dangerous, and the people that say it's dangerous are talking nonsense. There's no danger. There's absolutely no evidence that it's dangerous. And Professor Tom Butler down in University College Cork, he actually went, okay, this is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous article. It's full of absolute nonsense. So he launched a complaint with the press ombudsman, saying this article is saying there's absolutely no evidence. There's overwhelming scientific evidence. And he presented that evidence to the press ombudsman, who, upon reading that, went, okay, fair enough. That there is overwhelming scientific evidence. So they found in his favor. And the result of that, of course, was highly disappointing, because then, and it took about 6 months, I think it was about February 2020, the Irish Times was forced to acknowledge that, the finding had gone, that this article was misleading. But the result of that was, I think they offered him, you can write 500 words on why it was wrong. And I mean, we're going to be struggling with an hour or so here, do you know what I mean, talking about this to even begin to scratch the surface of it. So 500 words, and I think he just, at the end of it, went, forget it. What am I going to be able to do in 500 words? This is huge, this is massive. Again, in terms of the the 2, 3, and 4G, again, there's so much scientific data that when you get to this point, you've got tons and tons and tons of science, of scientific evidence for the detrimental health effects of it. Then you you fall into the field of a meta-analysis. And there's a very good meta-analysis. I think, for my opinion, the gold standard in terms of the meta-analysis of this, which I think comprises, over 5,000 papers summarizing all that, is what's called the Bioinitiative Report. And the Bioinitiative Report, I think, was initially published in 2007, I think it was, for about 14 scientists, PhDs and MDs. And then they've done updates. So I think there's about 30 PhDs and MDs now. And they've attempted to to take all these scientific papers and pieces of research and put them into a meta-analysis. So it's very good, actually. So there's like a color chart just showing you a one-liner in each chart, for at this level, this harm was found. At this level, this harm was found. And they color code it into, this is a DNA problem, this is a neurological problem, this is a cancer problem, kind of thing, So if you're going to looking to go down that road, of doing your own research, that's another good place to start. Incidentally, I think pretty much everything I'm mentioning here, I'm doing it intentionally. Between two websites, between emfhomesurveys.ie, which is my own website, which has got a knowledge section, and IrelandForSafeTechnology.com, which is more in the obviously in the activism side of things, but also we're trying to raise public awareness. Pretty much, I think I'm trying to manage it without exception. Everything I talk about in this interview here will be, within so you can, one of those two websites, you'll find a reference to what I'm talking about, so you can go in and you can click on the link and go and read it for yourself and verify that what I'm saying is true and I'm not making things up and all the rest of it. So again, sorry now to be a bit long-winded, but as I say, it's just it's mind-boggling when you actually if you're coming from a, is there scientific evidence, to try and express just how much scientific evidence there actually is. It's overwhelming. Do you know what I mean? So that's the answer to that question.
And to bring that then, Aaron, obviously, right, so if 2G, 3G and 4G, as you say, there's, vast swaths of overwhelming evidence to suggest how dangerous they are. To bring it into the modern context with regarding 5G, obviously there's a lot of, conjecture, uncertainty, speculation regarding the health implications of 5G. Yet, I suppose, specifically within the truth movement per se, there definitely is a noticeable absence of scrutinized data-driven analysis and meta-analysis. What have the peer review scientific articles actually been unequivocal about regarding the adverse health effects of 5G, and how robust is that data? I appreciate that's a wordful.
It is, and the answer is now the exact opposite of my last answer, because the reality here now is there's none whatsoever. And this is why I got to confess now, when you understand the kind of the scientific evidence that exists there for 2, 3, and 4G, and then 5G comes out and the public goes, oh my God, 5G. I was initially going, what, why are you concerned about this now? What about all the others? I was confused as to why the public had latched on to 5G. And the answer to that question is because of a lack of scientific studies. Now, I'm going to say, so basically, there has been no safety testing of 5G. And this is, I think, why the public kind of latched on this. And in particular, and again, I think this video is on the Ireland Pacific Technology site. There's a videos link or whatever in there. And you can see it. So in 2019, during the beginning of 5G rollout, there was a Senate committee hearing. I can't remember his first name. Blumenthal, I think, was the US senator that basically had the telecoms industry in front of him, and he was beginning to ask the right questions, And again, as we said initially, it's very easy to baffle and bamboozle with scientific terms and kind of swapping out terms here and there and all the rest of it. So he worded it very, very cleverly, and he asked them, how much money have you spent on the safety studies for this new technology? And it really is a video I encourage everybody to go and watch the squirming and the kind of I don't know what really, but he forced them to say the answer is zero. You have not done any scientific studies. Now, John, if you wanted to sell a teddy bear on the market, you would have to go through safety studies to make sure that teddy bear, the nose isn't going to poke a kid's eye out or something. And that goes for absolutely every single product and service on this planet, with the exception of 5G technology, And that, I think, was enough for people to go, wait a minute, something's not right here. How can we be rolling ahead with this, given that we've got so much evidence that 2, 3, and 4G and all the rest of it is problematic? Of course, from an industry perspective, they try and brush over that. But that was why I think the public latched on to 5G. And that simply, they were, it's quite out there and open that there's been no safety studies from it. So, I can't remember the exact wording of your question there, but how much data do we have? None. How robust is it? Well, there is none, so it's not robust at all, compared to...
So if we don't have the data on the safety studies, or do we have any kind of, like, there must be articles or there must be data relating to the most worrying or the most prominent potential health implications and concerns of what 5G actually is. Like, there is some categorical data in that regard. Am I correct in saying that?
Not with 5G, and it's a little bit when we talk about the safety studies of 3G or 2G, it doesn't kind of really quite work like that. The safety studies are done at certain frequencies for certain durations, et cetera, which so happen, that 2G or 3G or something, whatever technology or Wi-Fi or whatever is using. So it's not quite that simplistic. It's certainly not in terms of the 5G, but this is the thing. The 5G, for some reason, the public latched onto this, and in the pushback against wireless technology and the dangers of it in general, like in Ireland myself, but obviously there's further afield, we actually went, okay, brilliant, you know, for whatever reason, you know, if they've latched onto this, we'll use this to try and raise the public awareness about the other problems, you know, with the 2G, the 3G, the 4G. But so not specifically on the 5G, but again, the 2, 3, and 4G, you know, provable detrimental health effects. The 5G is just higher frequencies again, you know, so generally speaking, it's an oversimplification, but generally speaking, higher frequencies, more energy, more radiation, kind of a thing. And again, there's lots of little tricks that the telecoms industry use to kind of to try and again bamboozle the public. You know, like one example would be they say, oh well, the 5G doesn't actually penetrate the body as deeply as the 2G and 4G, so therefore it's not a problem, you know, kind of things. And that's just nonsensical kind of thing. But when you, the other kind of, with taking the kind of 5G aspect, if you like, out of that, what you just asked, and kind of the most problematic health concerns, that is absolutely, you know, because we've got so much data on this, the various health concerns, you can kind of relate, you know, certain papers to certain conditions and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not a doctor. As I explained from my background, I came at this from the technical angle, and I've spoken to people that come at it from the medical angle, and I have to confess, sometimes they, you know, it's over my head, they're bamboozling me. But anyway, nonetheless, I have gone in and kind of, you know, looked at the research that's there. Now, the bottom line here, and again, I'm not sure a lot of people kind of really grasp this, you know, what are the most problematic detrimental health, you know, health effects of this technology? I'm saying the technology now, so, you know, wireless technology. And so I'm encompassing the whole lot from 2 to 5G and Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. And really kind of at the end of that exploration for me was this kind of realization, it's everything. It appears to be everything. That can't be right. And it really is. So it's everything from fatigue and called brain fog, you know, memory loss, sleeplessness, headaches, migraines, anxiety, depression, through into weight gain, DNA damage, through on into leukemia, Alzheimer's, cancer, being at the other end. It's the full spectrum of basically, you know, it's like the fundamentals of the human body breaking down. You know, they're just not used to exposure to this type of radiation. And again, it's, you know, there's no opt-out here. We're all exposed to this 24/7. If I do this research and I go, do you know what, this technology is not for me, thank you very much, it's not like I can switch that off or opt out of that. We're all bathing in this 24/7 in increasing intensities. So, and this kind of goes back into the question you were asking again about the research. So there's, you know, there's a number of different ways you can go about the research, you know. So on the EMF home surveys kind of knowledge section on that side, what I've done in there, so I've gone for knowledge section. I've tried to ask, you know, the kind of the 5 key fundamental questions, which are kind of, what are EMFs? Where do they come from? Are they really damaging to our health? What are the safe limits, and how do I keep myself safe from this? You know, and I think in each of those, I kind of do a beginner, intermediate, and advanced kind of a thing. And so is this really detrimental to health? So I do reference, you know, the Bioinitiative report and stuff in there. But what I do is I go through, you know, these kind of, I think it's like about a dozen of the key detrimental health effects. You know, we're starting off with sleep, you know, poor sleep and fatigue, and going through all the way down to leukemia and cancer. And for each of these kind of main physical problems, detrimental health problems, I give 1 or 2 papers just so you can begin your research on that. You know, so if you were, for example, if you were concerned about, you know, is there really scientific evidence that shows that radiation from wireless technology is affecting male fertility or female fertility. In there, down there, there's fertility, and there's a couple of example papers on that. The Aeronautics technology side kind of switches tack on that a little bit, and what it does is it went, okay, tell you what we'll do, we'll not even bother with papers that are, I think, more than about 5 years old, just only the most recent scientific papers list, for those particular ailments, if you like. I think it's underplaying an ailment. And so that's the way it does it. And so I think there's a couple of hundred or so in there. Again, there's so much data here that it's difficult to navigate. You almost need some sort of a plan for it. So answering your question, it's the wide spectrum of human problems. It's not something specific. It doesn't just cause cancer or just cause fertility. It does cause cancer and fertility issues, and everything in between.
It's quite harrowing, Aaron. It is
absolutely harrowing. It's one of those things. And again, particularly, maybe not particularly, but if you've been working in the industry for 15 odd years and you suddenly find this out, it's like harrowing and shocking, and what's going on? And if I don't know this, God, what does everybody else know? But anyway, sorry, that was a bit long-winded again. I know it's
you're fine. I was the way, obviously we don't have that significant amount of data to go by, but I believe, correct me if I'm not mistaken, that most of the 5G towers in Ireland were erected in around the time about 2 years ago during the first lockdown, if I'm not mistaken, in around that period. So that's about 2 years of data in terms of that has been we've been able to sift through, or that people like yourself, I'm sure, have been able to sift through. Is there anything significant that's been gleaned over the course of the last 2 years which points to some of these kind of health concerns that you're speaking of and warning of?
Okay, so you're absolutely correct that, and we might probably talk about this just a little bit on going to the activism side of things. But you're absolutely correct. Kind of once March 2020 happened, once COVID happened, the 5G infrastructure rollout just completely accelerated. Okay, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later on. This was in there was 9 counties in Ireland at that point that had moratoriums against 5G deployment. And again, always with this caveat of until adequate safety studies are carried out, kind of thing, and that makes it more palatable for politicians and all that to work with. But the other kind of part, so that's absolutely correct, and this rollout has been vastly accelerated over the last 2 years. COVID has been the driving force really behind that, because as everybody was locked in their homes and told you've got to work from home now, obviously now there's a lot more, even this here now, there's a lot, a lot more Zoom calls, there's a lot more internet use, and that was used as the driving force between, this perceived need for increased data capacity. So therefore we have to roll this out. So, you speak to, politicians before that were all about this, and you say, well, what about the moratoriums? It's like, but COVID, so it, and trying to, and in fact, the whole wireless pushback against wireless technology over the last 2 years has effectively been, for want of better, on hold, really, because you couldn't talk to anybody about anything else except COVID. And actually, this is even within the truth movement, and even still today. You talk about 5G, and they go, we've got bigger fish to fry, kind of a thing. And it's unfortunate, because there just isn't the realization of how big a part of the story, of the puzzle, that the 5G is. This is the technical infrastructure that's required for fourth industrial revolution that Klaus Schwab talks about. Not just the whole Internet of Things, everything being connected to everything else 24/7. Of course,
transhumanism, the Internet of Bodies, and all the rest. I was
just going to hold myself back from saying, when Klaus Schwab does say, the integration of humans and, biology and technology, so are we talking about the Internet of Things or the Internet of people, kind of thing. So, it is unfortunate that even within truth movement, and again, there's so much speculation and around 5G and what have you, or dismissal that it's not really a big important part of the puzzle at the moment. And I mean, they played a blinder in this because we did recognize that as COVID became started to kind of ease off, we went, great, it's an opportunity to try and get this back on the agenda, if you were. And then they've immediately switched now. And now everybody, it's Ukraine. It's the war in the East. It's again, there's always something more important to be concentrating on, kind of a thing. But nonetheless, we're kind of pushing.
Well, we'll bring it forward, and I just have one or two more questions, I suppose, from a technical standpoint, Aaron, and then we'll talk about kind of the activism, moratorium kind of side of things to finalize, so people can actually have something to take away, that they can actually take practical and pragmatic measures. So, there's obviously, and you may have seen many videos yourself, a lot of people, there's always been videos circulating with regarding damage to animal welfare and biodiversity of the land. Many people have seen fallen birds beside 5G towers. Yes. I don't know whether they've been substantiated or the veracity of them have actually been substantiated, but is there much kind of clinical scientific data on the effect of wildlife and the natural biodiversity of the land as a result of this technology?
So the answer to that question is yes. But admittedly, it is an area where both myself, Ireland, and the wider pushback against wireless technology is lacking. When I say lacking, I mean it doesn't get the emphasis that it should. I think we're missing a trick here, because okay, how do I go with this? So, okay, I'll just tell a story. First of all, when I was beginning to wake up to the whole 5G, or not the 5G, but the wireless technology side of things, it was a UNESCO report done by a naturalist in Australia, on a mountain in Australia. This was his backyard, and he'd done a 15-year study on this, the natural environment on these two particular mountains. It was over 15 years. He was a naturalist. It was his backyard. He knew what was there in terms of species and all the rest. And he, as a naturalist, obviously, he loved the whole thing. And basically, over the course of 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, he witnessed as they introduced, and they were putting towers, cell towers, telecommunications towers on these mountains. And he basically witnessed as these towers went up, and a new transmitter went on or whatever, he could literally tick off, that's another 5 species gone, kind of a thing. And so basically every time they introduced a new tower or a new transmitter, another few species would disappear off the list, that used to be on that mountain. Now, correlations, it's not equal to causation and all the rest of it. The bit that really kind of jumped out at me was that the kind of clincher, if you like, was that when they switched like a mast off for maintenance, within about 3 days, the species that had disappeared were coming back to the area. And I can't remember what he said, something like, to understand, what the information in this report means is to stare into the abyss. And I mean, that kind of was one of my kind of jaw drop moments. So there is evidence, but it's not as it hasn't been nearly as much attention and effort as there has on the human aspect side of things, which makes sense. It does make sense to me as well. I to put it simply, if you're trying to tell people, look, this is really dangerous and harmful to your children, and they don't listen, then they're not going. There's kind of this. Will I bother mentioning the wildlife kind of a thing? If they're not willing to react, even if there's the slightest possibility that this is dangerous to your children, you would expect people to react. That paternal instinct.
You're trying to find what has the most deep resonance with people, in terms of the severity and the peril of the situation. Yeah.
Absolutely, but I do believe we've missed a trick here, because there is, like I would consider myself an environmentalist, but and there is this kind of huge kind of green push at the moment, which is really confused at the moment. No, it is, because for me, if you're not, so sorry, hold on, before I get on to that, there's some other just kind of points of data on this. One of the fantastic kind of a conspiracy theory missed, as it were. So Marconi, when he did he did the first demonstration of radio telegraph, I think it was 1897 in the Salisbury Plains in England. A couple of years after that, the first radio station started in the west of France. The night they switched it on, a guy burst through the doors with a pistol, screaming about the pains in his head. He was the first. Yeah, he was the first, wireless technology conspiracy theorist, clearly, But anyway, the kind of joke, it's not a joke at all, but on January 22nd, 1901, which is a date historians might be aware of, Marconi opened put his first new powerful transmitter on the Isle of Wight in England. And they switched it on January 22nd, 1901, and the night they switched it on, Queen Victoria had a stroke and died. She was on the island at the time. The whole, you talk about the Jacob Astor on the Titanic kind of theory. But of course, that's kind of almost a joke. But what's not a joke is that about a few years later, 90% of the bee population on the island was gone. And this is the thing, there's this question in the green spheres about what happened to all the bees, And again, one of the kind of effects of wireless technology is the slowing down of metabolism, which causes weight loss, obviously. But for a bee, it actually means you can't digest your sugars and all the rest of it, And I think we're now at the stage we've had various names for it over the years, and now we're at, I think, colony collapse syndrome or something, So very much there's that sort of thing. They're also now talking about putting these transmitters in the oceans, which God knows what that's going to do in there. But it does. It affects, and everything, plant life, fauna, all the rest of it. But it is a trick we're missing because we're focused on humans, because I think if we can't convince humans that it's a danger to them, then they're not going to care about the fact that there's no insects on your headlights anymore. Or there's no butterflies during the summer. But again, I would just to say, with this whole green push going on at the moment, of course, there's the other side of it as well, that this technology, if you want to get into the cobalt and lithium and all, the rare earths and what have you that are required for this. And the 2,000 tons of toxic waste that's being generated for every ton of rare earths, on that side of things. So if you're an environmentalist and you're pushing this 5G, which they are, which is some sort of ridiculously simplified, we need 5G for electric cars, we need electric cars to save the planet, or some ridiculous kind of, ridiculous.
Hey, look, we all recognise we're living in a warped inverse world.
Oh, absolutely. So, I would just say, if you're an environmentalist, if you're, interested in this whole green thing, and you're pro this technology, you're confused. You need to go back and research this, because this is the kind of the elephant in the room, as it were, with regards to this. So, again, long-winded, but yeah, absolutely, it is detrimental. I think the main resource maybe to go for that would be a guy called Arthur Furstenberg, who would be probably kind of say one of the movement's purists in that, who doesn't pull any punches, and he does concentrate on the birds and the bees and and insects and all that, and those kind of problems that a lot of other groups kind of don't. But yeah, the thing is, just on that, you talked about the birds, and I've seen the videos, and the birds will come and they smash into the ground, what's all that about? But again, I'm coming at this from a very scientific point of view. Yeah, that's weird, but that's not evidence for me. I wouldn't be using that, and I'd be very concerned about making any claims about that. Again, based on the fact that we have undisputable, proven scientific evidence of this stuff being detrimental to to human health, I'm very cautious about adding any sort of theory or hypothesis or something on it that's not cast iron, because then you're going to you run the risk then of discrediting all the genuine science there is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the fact that the truth is, the scientific data is so irrefutable there, and it's so cast, it's
Yeah,
cast in stone that there's no need to embellish it. It's
that's
completely
exactly it.
necessary.
That's exactly
You
it.
know,
Yeah.
so with regarding the 5G at the moment, Aaron, and we were chatting about this a couple of weeks ago, and I was chatting to you about I think it was graphene oxide, which a lot of people will be familiar with as for one reason or another,
Yeah.
and how that's radio malleable, and that if potentially the 5G goes up to 26,000 gigahertz, that could cause very, very severe ramifications in the blood. So with that in mind, it made me, and then that's the first time I heard about that, what the licensing was. You were telling me about what the licensing is now, and you said we're absolutely nowhere near that at the moment. What stage of licensing and how does the licensing system actually work with regard to 5G are we currently at? And what is the current gigahertz frequency that's actually being used? And what trajectory is this going to take if we don't do something to stop it? Three
Uh,
questions to one. I appreciate that.
yeah, no. First, just to give you a quick correction there. Yeah, no, we're not at 26,000 gigahertz. That 26 gigahertz is the
Sorry.
frequency.
Yeah.
So the reality in Ireland at the moment, and again, we're oversimplifying everything here for a very specific reason. But the reality of 5G is it's across different frequency bands. And so in Ireland at the moment, I believe it's 3.4 to 3.8 gigahertz is what's being licensed at the moment. There's a 700, around about 700 megahertz band as well. This is going to be used for carriers. It's getting a bit technical in that, because the higher the frequency you go, the more data you can encode in there, the more data it can carry, but the less far it can travel before it deteriorates and all the rest of it. So you use carrier signals, and that's getting into kind of physics side of things, but that are just going to overcomplicate things here. But so the reality now at the minute, we've got 3.4, we've got license out for 3.4 to 3.8 gig. I think that's right, yeah. I think 700 megahertz is on the cards, but hasn't been licensed yet. I hope I'm not misquoting on that. But definitely, then the other band is the 26 gigahertz that you're talking about. And when we talked about no scientific studies, and then you're talking about, but 4G, and no 5G and all the rest of it, that's kind of really, again, what we're talking about there is frequencies. So certainly as far as I'm aware, there's no data, no testing being done over 2.5 gigahertz. So this is kind of where we're in the realm now of no safety tests have been done, But so although nobody's been licensed for 26 gigahertz in Ireland yet. Oh, and interestingly, when you think about go back to your very, very first question about millimeter waves, and millimeter waves, generally speaking, are considered around about 30 gigahertz. So 26 gigahertz is, quite close to that. So we're talking about the introduction of millimeter waves to Ireland. And hopefully from the first question, what is this? It's just kind of higher frequency, more energy of all, of the same that we've already got provable science that says it's detrimental to health. So that's the reality now at the moment, 3.4 to 3.8 with 700 meg, which is going to be used kind of more as carrier, I imagine. And we've also got 26 gigahertz, which is coming up with the millimeter wave stuff, but that hasn't been licensed in Ireland yet, as far as I'm aware. Pretty sure that's the case, but it's on the cards. It's kind of in the pipeline kind of a thing. With regards to where does this go from there? And again, the 5G side of things is the interesting one, because if this is allowed to charge on without any safety testing, then a precedent is set at that point, and just it's batter on. And the reality is, again, there's been no testing done on any of this, so everything going on. So moving on from there, I mean, China already talking about 6G, which is just generally, I imagine, just going to be higher frequencies again, more frequencies, more energy, more radiation at levels and in a way that hasn't been tested. Again, what they'll argue is, but it doesn't penetrate into the skin. It doesn't penetrate into the body as much, so we don't need to test it. Something like that.
Their experts are conjuring a narrative to say that it's safe.
Oh, very much so. I think your own audience would have been very much aware of a lot of the trickery that's used around science now. Where science is, look, I'm all for the scientific method. You kind of you come up with a theory and you test it, and can you reproduce it, and all that's going to carry on.
There's a distinction between real science, Aaron, and scientism.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's become a kind of belief religion now. If authority says it, which is so far from science. But so that's the reality. What we're talking about, if this is allowed to go ahead, we don't manage to stop this. Then you're just talking about more and more generations of this technology, more and more higher frequencies, more energy, more overall. Of course, like 5G doesn't replace 4G or 3G, or it just gets built on top of what's already there. That's already been proven to be, detrimental to their health.
And Lord only knows what the long-term health implications would be in that regard, Aaron. So I suppose with that in mind, I might just bring it forward to the latter part of the interview, about kind of moratoriums, lobbying, and pushback, because obviously anyone who's been listening for the guts of the last hour will understand if they hadn't done so already.
I can't believe we did this for an hour.
Well, yeah, I know it's a very important conversation. So, and as you say, it's such a broad topic, and everyone get really everything out there. But it is, as synopsis as possible. But obviously, it's so important for people to understand what it is that they can actually do and how it is that this has actually happened in terms of public accountability. Is there, to the best of your knowledge, is there any individual kind of politicians or corporations which are actually directly responsible and accountable for the installation of 5G? Like, is there any paper trail there, to the best of your knowledge?
It's a great question. And I think it's kind of the answer to your question is actually kind of cryptically contained within it. In terms of pushing back against this, in terms of holding accountability, the key, which is it's just a complete secret here, that, take this name and go off and Google it, is what I would say to people. The key here, the best kept secret in the pushback of this, is a guy called Ray Brimhall. And Ray Brimhall is a barrister in Australia who single-handedly managed to get, I believe it was 1,600 telecom masts blocked and 900 existing masts taken down. Ray Brimhall. It's probably the two words that you're not allowed to mention anywhere in the telecoms industry. Ray Brimhall. And so basically he came up with a method in terms of how he achieved that. And there was kind of a couple of fundamentals to the whole thing, but and it's a little bit complicated because you do need a couple of solicitors on board. Now he was a barrister, so he's able to do a lot of that himself. But you need a couple of doctors, and there's a few bit. Basically, he came up with a 20-point plan of how you do this, and kind of shared it with the world. And the two key concepts on it are one, it's an assault. You're assaulting me with electromagnetic energy, with electromagnetic radiation that I do not consent to. So, and in Ireland, I think this falls under the non-fatal offences against the Person Act, which when you go in, you look at the definition, it has electric current is in there, So you're, obviously if I push you, John, or punch you, that's an assault. Yeah, that's force, but also electromagnetic force is entailed with that as well. So, that's kind of the crime that's being caused, if you like. And the main point in it is that you do not bother trying to hold companies or any of this to account. It's individual people. So it's like it'd be the head of Air. Do you know what I mean? That name, that man, not Aircom, not Air, not Three, not Vodafone, the individual person. Because if you go at the companies, then and even if you won, it's just paid out of the treasure chest kind of thing, and there's no accountability.
So similar to a lot of the notices of liability that people, a lot of people have introduced through the COVID scheme. They're looking for them as in their own individual personal capacity, not in their position within a corporation or a company.
Absolutely, getting away from this corporate law kind of side of things. Now, that said, very early on in the Irish pushback and that, I mean, Leo Varadkar was put under notice of liability for it and all this. And, the reality is nothing happened, And that's whenever kind of tactics were changed and we kind of moved down the scale. So, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Ray Brimhall method, I do, why reinvent the wheel? If somebody has managed to achieve this, single-handedly, no less. The precedent is there. that he got results. He got 1,600 mass blocked and another 900 taken down. You know, this is the way we should go. So in terms of individuals, I would say the individuals of the companies that are putting this technology out there, you know, be it cell towers, whatever, the individuals at the heads of those companies, yeah, those would be the people who would be, if you like,
do you know what companies by any chance? Is it a multitude or a myriad of companies? Is it companies that are hidden within other conglomerates, or is there only kind of a couple of companies that are responsible?
No, not really. I mean, so the reality is it's three, it's Vodafone, it's Air, and you know, and one or two others. You know, those are the people that are putting these masts up here.
The main players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's Imagine, there's maybe one or two others, but those that's what we're talking about. When you talk about the politicians, I have to confess I was very jaded when I was going through my kind of process on this, you know, and I thought, oh, they all know this is all dangerous, and you know, they don't care, blah blah. But the reality is they don't. You know, they're operating, and you know, people will say I'm playing too much kind of benefit of the doubt here, but you know, I've spoken to a lot of politicians about this, you know, and they don't know. They're just told by you know, whatever, the EPA or whatever, that, oh, this is completely safe, nothing to worry about. You know, the Irish Times article we referenced earlier, do you know, and they're like, okay, so that's that then, you know, and then there's a crazy person over there saying it's dangerous, but he's a crazy person, you don't need to listen to him, you know. So I mean, in terms of the accountability, that's, in my opinion, where the accountability should stop and end. The heads of these companies that are putting this technology up there, that's exposing all of us involuntarily to an electromagnetic force that we don't consent to.
And I actually just go off on a brief tangent just before we speak about the moratoriums that I know you were involved in I think it was February 2020. Do you know how many 5G towers there actually are in the country, Aaron? Because it seems as though they're propagating, you know, just from anecdotal evidence, from speaking to people, from traveling around the country, they seem to be sprouting up left, right and centre. Do you have any idea the quantity of them?
They are sprouting up left, right and centre. No, actually, I'm not able to put a number, except to say, yeah, an ever-increasing and accelerating rate of an increase in them. And yeah, absolutely, in the last 2 years. I mean, obviously Dublin got a few you know, back in 2019, but it's really been accelerating since then. No, this is the kind of just. So I know your question was how many, and I don't have an answer for that. You know, just lots and more every day. Kind of really is the.
The locations of them is also of deep concern to a lot of people because they see them near schools and in family estates. That's also another point.
Well, okay, that's a very easy one to solve. So if you go to the front page of emfhomesurveys.ie, on the front page in there, you'll see a little map of Ireland on there, which shows kind of like a summary kind of a thing. If you click on that map, that'll take you through to a map that has the locations of all the masts that's kept up to date. It's a little bit, the only one thing is kind of when you zoom into where you live and all the rest of it, and then you click on the mast to see what's on it, all the rest of it, it doesn't say 5G. It says NR, and NR stands for new radio. Again, you know, why they can't just write 5G. But anyway, so NR is 5G. So you zoom into where you live, click on your closest mast or whatever, or masts, you know, because if you're in an urban area, there's going to be dozens of these things around, you know. And that's the thing. So there's, you know, for every mast, there's tons of there's multiple transmitters and that. So look, in terms of locations of these masts, that's a very easy one to solve. Just go into that front page, click on that little map, and you can scroll around there. You can check out where you live and see what the story is.
I'm sure that'd be of deep interest to a lot of people. In terms of the moratorium, so Aaron, do you want to give people a little bit of a background as to, you know, what groups were involved, what came about, and what was the actual outcome of that situation? I know me and you've spoken privately about this, but just for the listener to have an understanding.
Yeah, so the reality on that was completely it was nothing to do with us. And in fact, the reality of who's achieving this or who achieved these moratoriums, the reality of the correct answer to that question is local groups. And it was actually, I believe it was County Clare, that the first did this. And as you kind of find, if you're trying to talk to the higher levels of government about your concerns about this, it's not going to work. They're not interested at all. And the further down in the kind of political ladder you go, so when you go to the local councils, and in a lot of counties, a lot of the local councils, you might know the councillor, or he's a friend of the brother-in-law or something like that. They're much closer to home. So they're much more willing to listen. And they're much more susceptible, in my opinion, to public opinion. So when a kind of a local group gets together and kind of organizes, okay, let's bombard our local council with emails of concern about this, and almost like force a reaction kind of a thing. So that's exactly what County Clare did. Got the reaction and got a motion for a moratorium on it put at council and was voted through, which was insane. But again, like we was talking about Ray Brimhall there now, so there was a precedence there. So we the whole group thing is kind of as much like you understand in the truth movement kind of thing, when you try and unite groups and stuff, trust and who are you and all that sort of kind of, all these problems, So we said, okay, look, we'll just kind of take a step back, and act in a supporting role, if you like, for local groups. So if you, John, you decide, okay, I want to get rid of, this mast, or I want to block 5G in my county. And we might know other people in your area, in your county, and that will put you in touch with them, and then we kind of provide. So we provide.
You want to, equip, enable, and empower them and facilitate them to actually do it on their own behalf.
Oh, absolutely, and in fact, I think all of them were driven by. Although we would help these groups.
How many moratoriums did you actually? Sorry for cutting across you there, Aaron. How many moratoriums did you actually have? Was it 8 counties? Did you say?
Nine counties.
Nine. And so that basically meant the moratorium was there was a temporary, like kind of a restraining order, essentially, on the installation of them pending further review. Am I correct? Something to that effect.
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So there was moratoriums. There was a blocking of licensing for 5G infrastructure rollout in that county until adequate safety studies had been carried out. We were happy enough to go with that, because these safety studies don't seem to be full of it. So, and that, as I say, made that a little bit more palatable for the politicians. We're not saying no to this. We're just saying let's get the safety studies first to prove that it's safe, and then we'll go with it, kind of thing. But it put a block, a halt to it. So yes, it was 9 counties. And so that's what kind of our role in that was. We kind of, so we made template letters and that you can use to send to your local councillors. And we provide them, so on there, and for safe technology, like take action, kind of, there's a button up at the top, take action, and you basically go down there and you select your county, and it gives you the email list for your county council, and a template letter. So it made, activism. So if a county went, okay, we're going to try and do this, we could spread the word, provide you with the email list, the template letter, made activism very simple, quick, effectively, like a 10-minute process, really, And if enough people in your county then applied pressure to the county councillors, you might invoke a response, they'll phone you back, generally speaking. They want your vote. Never forget that. You've got a politician's got exactly 2 problems in life, getting elected and getting re-elected, and that's your threat, And if you're complaining about something, they want to be seen to be addressing it, at local council level, not at the higher level. So that was the thing, yeah. And so when they would do that, we say, okay, if they're responding to you, set up a meeting, and we'll send somebody down. I did a couple of these meetings myself. We talked to local politicians. And generally speaking, I have to say, from my data perspective, I did then see, oh my God, they seem genuinely shocked about this, And I said, well, if you're genuinely that shocked, then you'll propose a motion for a moratorium against this. And they said they would, and I still didn't think they would, but they did. And not only did they, but the motion's actually passed. And this process I got to confess, I was quite surprised that this was working, but it was working. And I think with the milestone, the latest milestone in that, it was, in February 2020 with Mayo County Council, which voted unanimously for a moratorium against 5G. And at that point, it was easy. We now had 9 counties that had moratoriums put in place. So any other county council you went to, it's easy. You could just say, well, these 9 county councils care about their constituents' health, but you don't. Well, I think they'll find that very interesting come re-election time, kind of a thing. But then, March 2020 happened. The COVID thing happened. nobody wanted to speak. I mean, not to general public and activists alike. You know, there was this new priority. We were being locked in our homes. There was all sorts of things on the cards. So the whole momentum kind of not only just kind of halted on that, but then of course the moratoriums that had already been put in place got steamrolled over by local government, by national government. Now we were aware that was going to happen at some point. We were warned about this by the local politicians. Look, we can do this, but you know, the government will try and steamroll this. And we said, you know, that's grand. We're moving faster than they can at the moment. So when that fight comes, if we have, say, you know, 20 of the 26 counties kind of with moratoriums in place, we're in a position to fight that, you know. And yeah, the COVID just solved so many problems for them. You know, it's just they were able to steamroll that whole thing in with effectively no resistance, really. So that was really problematic. So yeah, with the kind of COVID kind of restrictions kind of thing backing off now, even though the kind of wars broke out in the east or whatever now, we're trying to get this back going again. We're trying to get some momentum going.
So with that in mind, actually, Aaron, just as you say, trying to get some momentum going, like what is the current landscape like in terms of the mobilization in the pushback against 5G technologies? I suppose most pertinently in an Irish context, and maybe with, you know, some reference to an international context as well, but most pertinently the Irish, what's happening in Ireland.
The answer is probably the same for Ireland and internationally. The reality is, everybody pretty much at this moment in time now is in regroup mode, you know, after basically a 2-year hiatus on that whole issue. We are ourselves, I say at one point in Ireland, you know, when the height of this was charging along, I think there was about 60, you know, small groups within Ireland. You know, even might have just been Facebook groups or whatever, but you know, there was about 60 different groups, you know, Stop 5G here, Stop 5G there, you know, all this kind of carry on. I'm sure a lot of that has kind of just faded off and kind of, you know, dissipated and over the 2 years. And in terms of the artificial technology side of things, yeah, we just kind of hit pause on the whole thing, really, because it's just you couldn't talk to anybody about it. So the whole movement, really, the whole pushback has been on pause and is at this kind of present moment in time trying to regroup and get going again. So there's a few different things on the go. As I say, because nothing was happening in Ireland over the 2 years, so we actually used that time, and of course all the other groups within Europe were experiencing exactly the same problem, you know. So we did actually use that time to meet up and have meetings with them, and we actually got together and we got to know them. So there was, you know, there's a bit of a silver lining in that. We were more familiar now with the European groups, and very recently, as a result of many meetings, we launched the European Citizens Initiative, which, as I say, even within our own group in Ireland, trying to get agreement sometimes is a nightmare. You know, add 26 other European countries, groups in there, and trying to get agreement on something is very difficult. But anyway, so we worked with them over the last couple of years. We've got this European Citizens Initiative thing, which is effectively exactly what you'd imagine, you know, this pushback against 5G, this, you know, hold this till we get the safety studies. And then because of the whole kind of, you know, the surveillance aspect of the, you know, the passports and all the rest of it. So we've got like a human aspect, if you like, an environmental aspect, and then a kind of privacy security aspect, you know, passports and all the rest of it, you know, coming into it now. So we kind of put those all together in this initiative, which has been accepted by the EU Commission now. We launched there on Tuesday across Europe. So basically now, Ireland needs to get, I think it's just over 9,000 signatures now as part of our quota for the overall. But it's not like a petition now. It's like we've 23 proposals in now for the EU Parliament, which if we get the correct amount of enough support from European citizens, then it forces a public hearing on these proposals, and it forces an official response from the EU Commission on these proposals. Now, and even if that doesn't work, it's going to bring up the kind of the awareness of the whole thing, which is what this is all about, really, at this stage in the fight. We need people to understand that this problem is there. It's, you know, and it's harmful to your children, all this sort of thing. So public awareness is still very much the thing on the cards at the minute. So it's the same all across, really. I mean, but I think America had some good success actually during the 2 years now, but generally speaking, mainly within Ireland and further afield internationally, it was kind of on pause the last 2 years, and everybody's trying to get going again now. Which is good. Go on, sorry.
Sorry, go on, finish your point then, Aaron. I'll just finish up with a final question then at the end, just to see, can we find some practical initiatives?
Yeah, so it was just, we finished off that. Again, one of the other silver linings in this kind of the last couple of years is, there are these groups coming together, community groups, which are kind of truth and freedom based and blah, 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 all the rest of it. They understand they've been lied to about an awful lot. And suddenly this issue has popped onto their radar as well now, which is why the talks and what have you seem to be, increasing now as we go forward. So there's that little silver lining that we come out of these 2 years. Well, the whole thing's on pause. That's obviously really bad. But because, basically the government and the media's credibility is taking a huge hit and people are beginning to question things they weren't questioning before, that this issue has hit their public consciousness now and they're keen to learn more. So there is that kind of positive side of things,
Excellent. So, that was actually it kind of dovetails with my final kind of question, Aaron, because as you and I both know, I suppose one of the great silver linings of the cloud over the course of the last 2 years is the mobilization of people, groups, very much on a localized basis in a kind of decentralized pockets of resistance. And, with regarding the COVID narrative and whatnot, we've seen various different groups who've been involved in, hold the line placard campaigns. I believe there's about 7 or 8 different groups around the country. There's meetings happening in all over the country. Many people may or may not be familiar with, but they're growing by the day because it's very much based upon local grassroots activism. So with that in mind, I suppose a lot of people recognize that having the establishment or the powers that be having, tapered the wheels off the COVID agenda from the 21st of January, that there was a little bit of a lull in terms of people being galvanized. They were seeking different kind of issues to galvanize behind, and one of which we're going to discuss hopefully in the future is Ireland being used as a nuclear waste disposal site.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very relevant one, but obviously 5G, as we've discussed here, very much is so as well. So with that in mind, what kind of practical, pragmatic measures can, those kind of individuals who are involved, who have their kind of, their little spiritual tribe, for want of a better term, in their local communities, what can they actually do to take a tangible action in this to add their weight into the pushback? Presumably it's I'm just thinking off my head, something like, more kind of holding the line placard campaigns, raising public awareness. What other kind of, practical initiatives can they take?
Okay, well, I guess the reality to this is the key at the moment for groups like that. So that have kind of crossed the threshold of awareness, in that they're aware that there's a problem here. The 5G being part of the puzzle. So I guess it's probably a good timing. So at the moment, as I said, if you go to the Ireland Perceived Technology.com page, and there's a take action button up there. So individually, that European Citizens Initiative thing I just talked about, straight away you can just go in there and you can sign that. That's something you could actually do today that will help. In terms of the group side of things, but the education really is the key here to this. What we did was to, even though we took about an hour and 20 minutes or whatever, we still only kind of glossed over the surface here. We've just, kind of done an introduction to what's real and what's not real in this whole issue. And further education is really the key to it. Before you can kind of really do something, you need to understand. You need to, like anything, if you're going to go out there and complain about PCR tests or vaccinations or whatever, you need to know your stuff. You can't go out there and convince somebody of something that you're not familiar with yourself. So I think actually you could maybe suggest kind of a little project. Timing wise is brilliant, because at the moment the government has opened consultation to the public on its digital connectivity strategy, which I think opened 1st of March there, I believe it was, and it closes on the 31st of March of this month. And basically the government's digital connectivity strategy, so obviously there's bunches in there, but to sum it, it's 5G everywhere, smart cities, etc., etc., etc. And it's open to public submissions. So maybe either on an individual basis or within your little group, if you kind of using the couple of websites that I mentioned, emfhomesurveys.ie, irelandperceivedtechnology.com, and Ireland.com is another one, another good one as well. The three kind of main Irish ones, I think, for in terms of good information. If you could actually get enough knowledge together, now there's template letters and all the rest of it in there that you could just steal them and use them. But the idea would be if you could, your own little group could come up with a little kind of a public submission. We're concerned about this technology. We're concerned about 5G everywhere, our smart cities, because, and list out your concerns and your reasons why. You could deliver a submission to the open consultation on the digital connectivity strategy. Now, is that going to make a damn difference and all the rest of it? Well, it does two things. One, it pushes back a little bit. If enough of these submissions get made, then it does force a response, if you like. And secondly, in doing so, it would increase your own knowledge. You begin to become more confident in kind of talking about this. 5G, is that dangerous? That's not really dangerous. And you'd be able to confidently kind of discuss it. Again, it's just one part of the whole, issue going on here. So that's a good little idea from that. And again, as you mentioned, these groups are coming together now. Start the conversation. Literally, a lot of them are beginning to start the conversation. And you can't really do, as I say, an awful lot until you understand it. Until you've got good things. Maybe nominate somebody in the group. Okay, maybe you go off and learn a wee bit more of that. Using the resources I just mentioned. Get the kind of general gist. Then you can kind of further that information in the group. Maybe you've got somebody in the group that's kind of concentrating on the kind of growing their own food or whatever it is, or they're kind of this, the healthcare, these sort of things. So maybe you could have somebody, that's go, I'll take on the kind of trying to figure out and get my head around this, and kind of then disseminate that information to the rest of the group. That's very useful. And it's, again, in terms of, we're in a bit of a regroup mode at the moment. So in terms of kind of pushback, we do have little legal thingies, going where. There was a lot of time. Again,
it was one of the questions actually, Aaron. I know that. Sorry for interrupting you there. I know the legal, that's not necessarily in your realm, but I do know that there's various different people that discuss potential. People who operate in that kind of. Well, sorry, I don't say legal, but more so lawful.
Yes.
But they were discussing kind of lawful means as to tackle 5G technology, and it's just popped into my head there. Like, to the best of your knowledge, is there much happening in that area? People who are trying to tackle it in a lawful way in Ireland?
I would say that the correct answer to that is yes, there has been all along, but it's been a very difficult and frustrating process. And it was going the way about it, within the system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, solicitors end up being disappointing. And that whole side of things is in regroup mode now at the moment as well, which is great. As I say, hopefully, lessons have been learned about, it's almost the next best thing to learning what works is learning what doesn't work, and yeah, mistakes have been made, trust have been placed in the wrong people, etc., etc., etc. Those lessons have been learned, and that whole area is in regroup mode at the moment now. So that, there's at least there's light at that. And I guess maybe just to finish off in terms of, it's one thing to say, 5G bad, we're against this and all the rest of it. It's quite another and more difficult oftentimes to say, well, what are we actually for? What are we actually trying to achieve here? And that answer to that question is incredibly simple. The answer to that question is one word. The answer to that question is wires. That's it. That's what we need to be doing here. We need the national broadband plan should be getting a wired connection to every single home in Ireland. That should be it. That should be the strategy. That should be the plan. That should be the digital connectivity strategy. Get a wire to every home. Wires don't have, obviously they're not wireless technology. They don't have the radiation. They're far superior in every way. It's the same voice goes down the line, but clearer. It's the same data that comes down the line, but faster, and more secure. It's not just there to be plucked out of the air. Wires are actually the solution to all this. If we're all using wires, then basically, if we're using, and unfortunately, I hate to even mention this, but I'm talking about the mobile phone side of things as well. We need to go back to a wired landline and a wired internet connection, and we can have all this connectivity that the ECA is called Stop 5G, stay connected but protected. That's basically it. Wires is the answer. Wires is where we're trying to go with this, and if everything's wired up, then you can just, at that point, the towers can come down because they're not being used. That's how we get rid of this. Wi-Fi in your home, use wires instead of wireless technology. That's actually it. Where is this going? If I was king for a day and chief of iron telecommunications, that right wire, everything. That's it. Get rid of these towers. Get rid of all that. You know, get rid of this wireless technology, which is irradiating us against our will. That's the answer. Wires. Simple as that.
Excellent, Aaron. I love it when it's full of sometimes simplicity. It is absolutely, it's bang on the money. Look, to finish up, I'd just like to thank you very much for your time and the information which you've shared tonight, Aaron. I think it's invaluable to the listener. It may, who knows, might actually require maybe a second or third part in due course. As I said, there's much more to investigate and to explore and to, I suppose, educate the audience essentially, so that they can then go and pass on that education to their own local communities, and it can have that kind of dispersal effect. Just to finish up, do you want to remind people there of maybe one or two or three kind of the likes of Ireland for Safe Technology primary good websites where people can find verified good information that they know is trustworthy and it's substantiated, just so they have those kind of focal points to go towards, just to remind them?
Yeah, and it's important. You're absolutely right, because there's so much information out there, how much of it's real and all the rest of it. So to have gone through and see what's there, and we'll keep it Irish. So the three main websites, which, I mean, if you manage to absorb all the information on those three websites, you're there, almost. So the three main websites would be my own, emfhomesurveys.ie. There's a knowledge section there that you can go through that kind of takes all through. On the more, again, a lot of information, a lot of resource, but concentrating more on the activism side of things is irelandforsafetechnology.com. And the other main good Irish site in terms of information on this would be es-ireland.com. So I think those three sites are more than enough. Even within those three sites, I mean, if you manage to actually kind of absorb all the information there, you'll be doing very well. But yeah, it is difficult, because if you just go off and hit, do an internet search on that and hit a random site, who is this? Is this verifiable? Is this nonsense? What I've just said, those three sites, and I know
they're quite reputable.
Exactly. Well, I'm involved in a couple of them, and I personally know the person involved in the other one. Absolutely, this is the right information. These are the people that are very careful about making sure they don't say a single thing that's wrong, because then you're discredited for everything you've ever said. So those three sites would be where I suggest to go on to continue. And you this is just, as you mentioned, this has just been gloss, kind of broad stroke kind of thing, hitting this wireless technology, why is it bad, etc. And you're going to have to further educate yourself on this. It's, certainly we can't do it in an hour and a half or whatever.
No, most definitely not. So I'm sure I've just read a couple of the comments there whilst we were chatting, and people have shared actually just those websites, and have said that maybe it might actually require a second or third interview. So with that in mind, Aaron, thank you very much for your time. With that, we're going to close down at tonight's episode of Double Down, and we will see you next Thursday night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.